Hi, this is Bob McDonald of Google's Project Euphonia. You can hear more about Project Euphonia and the things we're doing on speech recognition in the Two Disabled Dudes episode 118.
Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. That voice at the very beginning was the man himself, Bob from Google. So when you're done listening to this episode, go back to episode 118 and hear about all the amazing work Google is doing for people with speech impairments, such as me and Sean and many of our friends. We're lucky enough to be involved with the partnership between Team Gleason, Shin, and Google to encourage people with speech impairments to record phrases for Project Euphonia. Well, since we started, you've responded with 50,000 phrases recorded. So, first of all, thank you for that. Second of all, it's not too late to get involved if you want to contribute to our goal of 75,000 phrases by the end of the year. So listen to episode 118 and or go to teamgleason.org/Project Euphonia and find out how you can contribute to the goal. For now, we have an incredible interview for you. Chris Doveton wrote a memoir about losing his wife to Friedreich's ataxia and the extreme grief and depression that came along with that. He put it all down in his book, and he shares much of it in this interview. We got so much out of this conversation, and we hope you do too. So please enjoy our conversation with Chris Doveton. All right, it's always exciting to have an international guest joining us. Chris Doveton, you live in the UK and you're joining us via phone today. Thank you very much for being here, Chris. Welcome to the show.
It's a great pleasure to be with you both and to have the privilege, it's a great privilege for me to share this with the rest of the world. And that is an amazing achievement to be doing this, and I'm very humble for being part of this journey.
We're honored to have you, most certainly. Chris, it's really amazing to be connected because we feel like our community, the FA community, we feel like it's always so small, but then, there's so many people out there like us, right, that haven't been connected yet. So I really appreciate being connected to you today.
Yeah, you're right. There are very few people who know about FA, and even people who've now read my book have been quite astounded at what Friedreich ataxia is all about and how it affects other people and to what extent and so on. So it's getting that message over in whatever way we can, and that's what our sort of purpose in life is, to try and help others, and to help others to try and talk about it, because so often we keep things from other people because we don't want to share all the trials and tribulations we're going through, and we then have the stiff upper lip, which I look at in the book is about not telling other people and getting in other people to our conversations and so on.
I think just talking about it, like you mentioned, is probably the biggest hurdle to get over in the beginning, or even at some point. It's not easy sometimes.
I found it probably the most difficult thing to do when my wife was diagnosed with the disease, and we got so enclosed with what we were doing in our little small community and looking after her and so on, that nobody had time to tell others. And anyway, one didn't want to share all the misery and the burden and everybody else with the problems. And this is so prevalent in not just in mental health, depression issues, particularly severe depression, that people just can't share that. And that's why I've called the book I'm Fine, Thanks, because we're always fine. But behind that barrier, there's something that we really want to tell, but we can't.
So, Chris, I understand this is your third published book, and this one just came out, I believe, this year. I'm Fine, Thanks is really the connection that brought the three of us together. And I've been exploring your website and watched the little trailer for the book. Admittedly, I have not read it yet, but I am certainly looking forward to that. It's been added to my book list. And I'm anxious to read that. But for a listener's sake, can you back up a little bit in your story and give us a bit of a preface for what the book is all about?
Well, it's a long journey, and it goes through many phases and many stages of our life. And my wife, who was a marvelous person, was at the height of her career in many ways at 60, and she was diagnosed with FA. And it took quite a long time to be diagnosed, because in those days, we're going back now, sort of over 20 years, in 1992, there wasn't much known about ataxia. There was very little we could actually go on. And even the doctors she was referred to 3 or 4 times didn't know anything about it. So it took a long time for that diagnosis. And when it came, of course, it was a complete shock. We were told she had 10 years to live. And then, of course, it all started. And then the journey were not telling anybody, because all her family were medical, were surgeons and doctors, and all through her family. And she didn't want help from anybody else, or them telling her what should be done and what shouldn't be done, because they didn't know themselves. And so we went on this journey, ourselves. And Anne was a very private person. She was a very proud person. She wanted to face this journey by herself, and she wouldn't open up. And I think the worst part was when she decided not to tell her daughter, our daughter, Louisa. And that really was shocked her, that she couldn't actually come to terms even with her daughter. And it was after near the end, in 3 years before her death, the symptoms really worsened. And this is all in the book. And then the challenges really start. And then 2-3 years before her death, we lost all contact with our friends, contact with Bath Abbey, with our spiritual life suffered. There was no physical attachment to one another. All our sleeping arrangements changed. She came from upstairs and she had to be moved downstairs. And we turned the home into a nursing home. We had hoists all over the house. We had door entry systems put in. We had water beds. We had wheelchairs. We had reclining chairs. And each little stage we met, there was also opposition from Anne, because she didn't want to go. She was very proud. She didn't want to go to the next stage because she could see what was happening. She was a very clever person, and she could see every single aspect of this disease was causing, and still nobody knew anything about it. So we go through all this process of having building works and refurbishing the house and everything. And then the final straw came when, about a month before she died, she was told by the neurologist she had to have a peg. And because her eating was getting very bad, and she was sick, she couldn't eat anymore with only liquids. And the night before she was going to have this peg fitted, thank goodness, after I went up to pray in my bedroom, I came downstairs and she had died. And from that, it was then quite difficult, because she donated her brain to FA and for a further research. So her body was taken from our house that night at 10 o'clock at night and taken to the hospital, and was then sent up to London for future research. So that is just the sort of the gist of the story.
Chris, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I guarantee there are a few others who can relate with parts or the whole of your story. And I don't mean to diminish the pain that you both suffered. I want to honor that and honor the fact that you're talking about it, and that Anne's story can be used to help other people. And I think that's part of, as I understand, why you put it down. So I commend you for that, and I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. My whole life has changed since going through this episode of looking after somebody for 10 years plus who was going to die. And the aftermath of that nearly destroyed me. I got clinical depression. I was on antidepressants. I was then in and out of therapy most of the time. And my life was in tatters. I moved home. I bought houses and sold houses. I was like a headless chicken. I just didn't know what I was doing. And I was gradually getting worse and worse and worse. And the last stage was I nearly committed suicide because I had nobody, I'd nothing left in my life. And even my God had left me. And then, of course, I wish I had read The 5 Stages of Grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And that really looks at everything when we are depressed, we can look at in our journey. And that's one thing I come back to. And during this period, my friends had gone to the Abbey, but I still had my daughter. And my daughter got me back to where I live in Bath, and things changed. I then started going to Bath Abbey again. I started going to the gym again. I started playing golf. I then underwent major surgery 4 times during this period. I think that coming out of that and into a new life, and it got back to me, I was actually helping others in Dorothy House, which is a hospice nearby. And I actually was in the daycare unit looking after people with motor neurons and strokes and everything else. And this is where the hospice where my wife Anne used to go and get respite from. And I was able to sort of share their story with me, and that sort of helped me on my journey to be whole again. Wow. So the book actually was a respite to me. I could see that I needed to talk about it in this way, and it's really been the most wonderful thing that I think I've done.
Amazing. So one question that popped into my head while you were describing your journey, if we could go back to the relationship between you and Anne during the time when she didn't want to tell anyone. Obviously, that created distance between you two and all of your friends and family. And how did that affect the relationship between you and Anne at the time?
A very good question, Carl. It was very hard because on the one hand, I had the district nurses and the doctor and everybody else trying to be on my side because they were trying to help Anne not suffer as much by doing the things that need to be done, like putting in a wheelchair, like having a catheter, and even talking about this peg. So each stage was just fraught with problems to get to the next stage. And when you got to the next stage, you were over that one, you had to get to the other one. But I remember the time when she was not being able to walk and she was stumbling and she fell down and couldn't get up and I couldn't lift her. So we had to get this thing called a manga, which maybe people have heard of, which you inflate and put it under the patient and lift her up. And after, she always thought I was a bully, that I was bullying her into do things. And that was very traumatic because we had no physical attachment anymore. We couldn't have a physical life, which is always, very important to us. So we lost all that. And I slept upstairs and she slept downstairs with a nurse coming in at night to look after her as well. So it was fraught. But then was very human, and she used to turn around and said, "Chris, you are doing a marvelous job, and I'm sorry if I've been so awful to you in my journey, but I can't open my heart because I want to do it on my own." And I used to cry. I used to cry with her at so many things. Because of that, losing somebody you've been married to for 38 years, suddenly there's this big void, and there's nothing to fill this void, whoever it is, whoever it might be. And it really was quite an extraordinary experience, obviously leading me to the fact when I was whole again, I found love again and remarried. And that has been the most marvelous miracle in my life.
Chris, before we talk about your new love, as you say, I'm curious what, you mentioned your daughter, and she kind of helped rally behind you through the years of, obviously, I assume, immense grief and even turmoil within yourself after Anne passed. What would you say was a major turning point for you where you actually began, you talked about committing or wanting to commit suicide. How did you turn the page on that level of grief and depression?
I was in the depths of despair, and I met a priest on a walk in a wood, completely by surprise. I've no idea why she would be there. I didn't know her. And she gave me her card. She was asking about me, and I said I'd lost my wife and so on. And she said, "Well, if you ever do need help, get in touch." And after my attempt of doing this terrible deed, I was going through this trauma, and Anne's voice stopped me doing what I was trying to do. So I was coming back from this place of no return, and I phoned the priest, and she came straight away and saw me. And I also phoned my daughter, and she said, "Well, it's time to come home, Dad. Come, I'm here. Don't worry, we'll do it together." And the priest put me in touch with somebody at Bath Abbey. And about a week later, after I'd cleared things up, I was back in Bath. And that was the turning point that made it. And I talk about Louisa, my daughter, in the book, and the effect it also had on her when, at her young age of 2021, it affected her, as it does so many other people who of this age who lose their mother, lose their parent. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. I'm, tearing up a little, and I've got chills, and I just love the way you describe it, because this priest seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Like that, oh man, that just touched me so much. And what I related to is your book is going to appear out of nowhere for people. It's going to appear on that shelf, and someone's going to read it and be like, "Oh my gosh, I can relate to this so much, and this is changing my life." And so I think in a way, you're definitely paying it forward. The gift that you realized through that priest is coming to somebody else through your book, and that's amazing.
The steps I took to get it down on paper and so on were very, very difficult. I had somebody else to help me because it was so draining on me to revisit all those years and all my life and all the things that happened, not just to me, but to Anne, and the effect it had on her, and my effect on my daughter as well, and how she suffered depression afterwards. So it was something that, looking back and how I did it, it was a great exercise for me. It had to come out to share with others. And as you said, I really do hope that someone will actually see the journey that they've been through as well.
So, Chris, just looking at the timeline on your website, you started writing in the early 2000s. this book that we're talking about is a recent publication. I'm curious, how did you convince yourself, or maybe how did everybody else convince you to, like you said, that getting that down on paper, I'm sure was not the easiest thing to do, and that probably opened up some old wounds. I'm curious, how did you get through that season, and maybe how did you become convinced that this story needed to be written, whether for your sake or any reader's sake?
A good question. I started writing when I'd had a major operation on one of my shoulders. And it was 4 months, 5 months before I could drive again. And suddenly it came to me, I'm going to go to a writing school. And I joined a writing school in Oxford. And the tutor became a great friend of mine. He was a published author himself. And I wrote my first book as my exercise for this course. It was self-published, and it was very light. And it's called The Spanish Dream, which is actually was about my time in Spain, when I was on my 7 years in the wilderness, and I bought a property in Spain. And then after that, I thought, well, this is very therapeutic, so I'll write another book called In the World's Shadows, which was a family book about my family, touched a bit on my background and my past and everything else. And when I got to the end of it, I realized that I'd missed a lot out of it. And I went back, and I hadn't got the courage to write the book I've got at that time. I realized that. So I started writing I'm Fine, Thanks. And it was going to be called A Journey Through Grief, but I'll tell you in a minute why it was called I'm Fine, Thanks. And it was then that I realized I couldn't have written it unless I'd become a person again and could understand other people and want to, through my connection with my faith, became very strong. And I was able to go on a special course for Christianity in the Abbey. And I joined a lot of people there who were of the same mind. And it just made the whole thing come together, that I was able to be strong enough and to do this, and have realized that what the aftermath is going to be when I'd have to answer questions and everybody and talk about it, which has been an amazing, extra bonus for me in every way.
I love hearing that. Chris, you talked about, you barely mentioned your current wife, but you also alluded to the reason why this book is titled what it is. I would love to talk about both. And I'm curious, how did you land on I'm Fine, Thanks?
Interesting question. I had a connection with someone in the family who had mental problems. And every time I asked him how he was, knowing that he needed help, it was always, I'm fine, thanks. And then I used to realize that most people you meet, whether it's in the supermarket or whether it's town, wherever it might be, and you ask people, how are you feeling today? I'm fine, thanks. And it's the first thing that comes out. And he repeated so many times, but not always, of course, but often I remember my wife when we took her to the supermarket in a wheelchair, and somebody came up to her and said, "Oh, you're not feeling very well today, are you?" And my wife, Anne, said, "No, I'm fine, thanks." And that's the reaction that you get. So that's why I called it that story, because I thought it just fitted in to what we were trying to do with FA and with mental health issues, people who've got mental health issues, throughout the whole world. And that's sort of stiff upper lip side of adoption of that phrase that has sort of came to mind.
Previous episode, Sean and I talked about this idea of authenticity. And sharing the not so bright side of your life and your feelings. And in many of those situations, it seems like it's difficult to effectively share that part, right? Especially with a stranger at the supermarket. I'm fine, thanks seems to be a convenient option, right?
Yes.
And so, do you have any thoughts about how to share the real side or the not so pretty side in an authentic way?
It's a very difficult situation, isn't it? And I look at the approach, I think, of trying to, if people ask me, well, what do you think of that? Or what are you doing now? Or whatever, I try and tell them a story about what I'm actually doing and try and make them feel comfortable to understand something they don't know about. Like a situation where I remember going to the supermarket and the fishmonger behind the desk said, well, what are you doing today? So I said, well, actually, I'm going on a Christianity course that I'm attending. And he said, oh, that sounds very interesting. And suddenly our conversation developed. And the next time he asked a bit more about what I was doing. And it sort of, there was a bond then of somebody who'd never been in that territory getting to understand maybe what that other person was doing. And that's opened up quite a lot of conversations for me. So a lot of people now I talk to, well, perhaps I wouldn't have said anything, I can now open up and actually discuss and get behind them, actually make them feel more comfortable.
I love that you share that story 'cause it gets me thinking about how automatic even such questions are, right? I work in the world of retail, so I serve a lot of strangers every day, and I feel like not only is that response I'm fine things sort of automatic, but even sometimes the question, oh, how you doing today? Or what are you doing today? Those are so automatic. And I've automatically in my life, hearing you share this, I just realized myself that I sort of go on autopilot even when I ask the questions. And that causes me to assume when somebody asks me how I'm doing or what I'm doing today, that they probably don't really want the truth. Like they don't really care. They're just being polite.
Yes.
So I love that story because it helps me see or realize the shallowness on both sides that we all probably engage in on a regular basis.
Yeah, and you know what, Sean, like you were saying, you don't need to go into, oh man, I'm feeling terrible today because this and this and this. What Chris was saying was just go a little bit deeper than
Yeah.
I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah.
Like that's maybe what it
Yeah.
takes, right?
Oh, lovely story. I had my ears damaged, so I went to somebody and I became sort of quite close to the show. I saw him quite a lot, and he was a doctor. And we talked, then started talking about my reading the lesson, which I did in Bath Abbey. And then he used to open up and say, well, what did you read today? Or what are you going to read in the Abbey? And so I told him the passage, and then next time we discussed it. And that has led to so many other things over the time that we've got so close. He's actually doing an interview for me because he's written an amazing interview on Amazon about the book. And every time I go and see him, he talks about the book. He said it's the best book I've ever read in my life.
Oh,
Wow.
And so I've asked him, he's going to do an interview for us that's going to go on Facebook and Twitter and wherever. And it's just an amazing story. And that's out of just talking to somebody and really feeling for that person, what they might be going through.
That's wonderful. It's powerful, the sort of bond that you talk about forming when you're willing to be a little bit open and just have your heart open to the possibilities of real connection.
Yep.
Chris, I would love to hear a little bit about what life is like for you today. You said you're 83, but you also talked about finding love again. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is going on in your world today?
Sure. Well, the story about meeting Pauline, my present wife, is also in the book. So I'll let you read it. But it was just a wonderful meeting in the Bath Abbey on what we call a ledger stone, which is a stone after during coffee. We have the service and we have coffee afterwards. And this was during the 3-minute rule. The vicar then has a 3-minute rule. You have to go and talk to somebody you don't know. And so I saw this lady on her own and thought, oh, she looks lonely, and I'll go up and talk to her. Anyway, it ended up with us getting together. I used to sing a lot, and she came to 2 or 3 of my concerts. And, we have been married now over 5 years. And it's just an amazing story. She had a troubled first marriage, and I was able to help her see another perspective of life, having been what I'd been through. And this just cemented us, and it's been a most wonderful marriage. And it's quite extraordinary because she's a person in whom I have found so much of Anne in her healing attitude to other people, to helping other people all the time, which Anne was very much always did. And Pauline's the same. And we do so much together. It's absolutely wonderful. And during lockdown, it's been a blessing. And she's been me on this journey writing my book, which has kept me going. And she's been working. She's a lawyer, so she's still working.
I saw a picture of the two of you on your website. You guys are a good-looking couple.
So, Chris, we'll begin to wrap up. I don't want to keep you all day, but I would love to know or hear from you. What do you obviously, I imagine this book was quite an exercise for you and even your daughter. But what do you hope this message or this book does for any reader over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
I just feel that lots of messages. I think the main one is that to try and share, however awful depths of despair you are, you need friends around you. You need to be able to talk to people. You need to be able to share your worst moments with them somehow. And that's why so many people, maybe they start with having therapy, but so often they fall out of it. And I found that therapy was absolutely wonderful for me. But I persevered, and you have to persevere in this. And you have to try and think about others as well in your journey that you're going through. And I think the biggest message is never give up. There's always hope. There's always help the other side. But you've got to go out there and help yourself find it as well. So I think that's my sort of message, although there are so many messages in the book that I'm giving out, and I hope people will realize that there is something that they can log on to and know they've experienced that sort of situation in their lives, and go through the healing process.
That's wonderful. So, Chris, if our listeners want to find out more about your book, about you, where should they go?
Obviously, my website, it's on the website. In the USA, the Amazon would probably be the best place to be able to buy it. Because I was an unknown author, most of the bookshops look at it and say, well, you're not a published author, we won't stock it. And the only platform I have to get it out is through wonderful people like you, but also through the social media. I mean, I've that's the only way I can really get the message out to people where to buy.
The book is called I'm Fine, Thanks. The website is chrisdoveton.com. We will link it, our show notes on our website. And what social media platforms should people be looking for you at?
I use Facebook and Twitter.
Well, Chris, I have a feeling once I read the book, we might have to have you back.
Well, it would be great. It's really a pleasure to be with you both. And I wish you well, too, in what you're doing and what you're going through. I feel that in me, and I hope we meet again one day.
I enjoyed every minute of that interview. Chris not only has an amazing and powerful story, it's very heart-wrenching, but incredible at the same time. I'm so grateful that we were able to connect with him and bring him onto the show. Kyle, briefly or shortly after the interview, Chris emailed us. There was something he wanted to share, and in the midst of conversation, it escaped him. But it's the epilogue of his book, and I'm sure he would have shared it slightly different in conversation, but he sent us what he wrote, and I want to share that with our listeners now. Again, I'll encourage you to find it on Amazon, this book. Ours are on the way. I don't know if I told you, Kyle, but I'm excited to read it. He writes, "Life is so different for me now. I will always remember the words Anne said to me when she was training to be a relate marriage counselor. I have been broken into small pieces by the tutors. This is the only way you find out who you really are. Only then can you understand the suffering of your clients and help them to lead a normal life again." Those words resonated with me as they do now. I thought Anne had been so brave to go through that in order to help those suffering. When I went through my own therapy years later, I too was broken into small pieces. I had to break myself, get to know the man I truly was. One thing I appreciate about Chris and his story are the decades of experience that are under his belt, right? He even said it. He's 80 something years old today, but he is still obviously a thriving man with a purpose to share his story in order to help other people along their journey as well. So, Chris, thank you very, very much for joining Kyle and I on the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Kyle, what's one thing you're going to do this week? We'll wrap up with our normals, our one thing, and our thank you note. So what are you working on this week?
This is an ongoing saga. As people know, I am finally getting going on all my renovations that I want to do for my condo, and I have a couple bids from contractors now, and I'm going to be choosing a contractor this week and moving on with that. So very exciting.
Nice. Well, I've gone back and forth, right? Cutting back Starbucks or talking about cutting back, blah, blah, blah. What I've noticed myself doing now is just not drinking anything. Like I'll have my coffee in the morning and that's it. And I've long been meaning to hit a specific number of ounces consumed in water, or gallons, and I'm not hitting it. So I'm hoping, or I'm thinking that if I throw it out here, then maybe I'll climb the hurdle of consuming more water than I am today. So my goal is 75 ounces of water every day this week.
All right, man. Good luck with that. And moving on to our thank you notes, Sean, who do you want to express some gratitude this week?
I want to say thank you to our friend Crystal at Print Project Managers. Crystal is our go-to when it comes to just about anything we need to look good, right? Whether it's a print work or a brochure or hats that we've done in the past, determinants for the taxi affair, two disabled dudes, whatever. Crystal is incredibly talented at not only the design aspect, but helping make sure it gets produced in a timely manner. So I want to say a big thanks to Crystal. She makes it easy for us to look good.
Yeah, all right. My thank you goes to Dr. Rob Wilson. It's another thing that relates back to the Red Ataxia Global Challenge. And Rob he's like one of the first FA scientists, and he's still an incredibly passionate scientist in FA, and he cares so much for the community. And he rode over 1,000 miles for the Red Ataxia Global Challenge in 1 month. So thank you to Rob Wilson for all the effort you put into the FA community.
Kyle, as always, thanks for another incredible episode. And thank you again, Chris, for joining us. We look forward to chatting with you next week. Until then, keep living with urgency.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Find us online at twodisableddudes.com and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Special thanks to our friend and audio producer, Jake Tompkins.